Hi, Jayden. This is Michael. Sorry I can't be with you today for the lesson. I thought instead I will send you this video because I'm actually unfortunately busy this afternoon. It's a shame I won't be able to see you and the progress that you've made and answer the questions that you might have and be with you there in the moment to watch you play a game and to help you with that. But I will be back next week with that. And in the meantime, I hope this video helps you and gives you something else to learn from. Okay, so let's not waste any time. Let's get straight into it. I have some things to show you. And we're going to start with the loose-piece-o-tron that we were looking at last week. So loose pieces, they're undefended pieces. And it's very important in chess, very, very important to become very comfortable with identifying loose pieces or undefended pieces. Okay. And here there's 10 squares that we have to find, 10 undefended pieces. Okay, so let's be systematic. Let's look through each file one at a time. So on this file, we can see here's one undefended pawn. Here's an undefended pawn. Here is an undefended pawn. This knight is defended by the pawn, by the c pawn, and by the bishop. This pawn here is undefended. The bishop, is that defended? Yes, it is. It's defended by the king. And the pawn is also defended by the king as well as by the bishop. This pawn here, however, is undefended. This pawn is defended by its neighbor, but this pawn is not defended at all. This bishop here, is that defended by anything? No, it's not. It is attacked by this pawn, but it's not defended by anything. So we'll hit on that. Now the king is undefended. That's true, but I don't think we need to worry about the king because the king, if the king's ever attacked, that's the end of the game. It's always very important to be aware of the king, but I don't think we have to find it in terms of these puzzles. Okay, there's nothing on this file. This is what's called an open file because there's no black pawns and there's no white pawns on this file. It's just open. That's an important word to know, open file. Okay, on the F file, we have an undefended pawn on F7. It's not defended by anything. We have an undefended pawn on F4. It's also not defended by anything. The pawn here on F2, that is defended. It's defended by the king and it's defended by the rook. The rook itself is defended by the king. And the pawn over here on H2 is also defended by the king. This pawn is defended by this pawn. This pawn is defended by the rook. The rook is, however, not defended by anything. And so that is the final one. Now we have another situation where once again, what we want to do is identify all of the loose pieces, the undefended pieces. And let's go through it in the same way. You know, we want to look at the whole position, make sure we take the entire board into consideration. So let's just go through it in the very same systematic way. The pawn here on A6, that's defended by the B7 pawn. The pawn here on A4, is that defended? It's certainly not defended by any neighboring pawns, but it is defended by the knight on C3. So yes, it is defended. Okay, what about the B2 pawn? That is undefended by anything at all. So that's one of them. And the B4 pawn, that's also undefended. What about the B7 pawn up here? Is that defended by anything? It's not, is it? Okay, very good. So let's move on. We have the C6 pawn, which is defended. It's defended by the pawn on B7. It's also defended by another piece. It's defended by the knight. Okay, so we're getting familiar with the way that knights defend things in the shape of an L. Can you see that? It's kind of like an L. And our knight over here sort of defends also in the shape of an upside down L, defending the A4 pawn. And also, we're going to see it also defends the E4 pawn in the shape of an upside down L in reverse. But we'll get there. So this pawn is in fact defended. The knight, is that defended? Well, yes, it is. It's defended by the B2 pawn. Okay. On the D file, there are no white pawns. There are no black pawns. So this is an open file. We have an open file here. We have the king. We have a knight. Is the knight defended? It's not defended by anything, so that's also undefended. This pawn, as we've said, that is defended. It's defended by the knight. Okay, we're not going to worry about the king for now, even though in a real game, the king is the most important piece. Okay, on the F file, is this pawn defended? It is. It's defended by the G5 pawn. Okay, what about this pawn? Is that defended? Yeah, by the king and also by the knight. The knight, again, in the shape of that sort of an upside down L, defends this pawn. Onto the G file. Is this pawn here defended? Well, yes, it is. It's defended by the H pawn. Okay, and what about this pawn here? Yeah, it's defended by the H pawn as well. What about this H3 pawn? Is that defended by anything? No, it's not. So that's one of the loose pieces. What about this pawn? Is that defended by anything? No, it's not. And finally, this bishop up here, is that defended by anything? No. Okay, so there we go. Let's do a couple of more of these, 2 more of these loose-piece-o-tron puzzles. And the idea is just to train your vision and your eye so that when you see a position, you get very good at identifying loose pieces. Okay, when we finish these 2 last puzzles from the loose-piece-o-tron, I'll click on over to some different style of puzzles. And then we're going to see why this matters. Why does it matter? Okay, so we're gonna learn that as we go. Okay, but for the moment, let's continue on in the same fashion, making sure we cover the entire board. Let's go through and look at all the undefended pieces. Is this defended? Yes, it's defended by the rook. Okay, so I'm going to go a little bit quicker now. Is the rook defended? No, it's not. What about the knight? Is it defended? Yes, it's defended by the rook. The pawn on b2, is that defended? Yes, by the bishop on c1. Let's move on up. Here's a bishop. Is that bishop defended? No, it's not. There's a loose piece. Very important to identify. What about black rook here on b8? Is that defended by anything? Yeah, it's defended once again by this knight in the shape of an L. Okay, that knight defends the rook, so it is defended. Okay, hopping over to the C file. Is this pawn defended? No. Is the knight defended? Yes, it's defended by the bishop. Our pawn here, is that defended? Yep, it's defended a lot of times. It's defended by the queen. It's defended by the B pawn. It's defended by the D pawn. And it's defended by our knight. So this pawn right here, that pawn is very, very safe. What about our bishop here? Is that defended? It's not. It's not defended at all. Over to the D file. We have a pawn on D2. That is defended by the queen and by the bishop and by the knight in the shape of that funny L. Our queen is defended by the pawn. What about this bishop here? Is that defended? It's not defended by anything. So we can click on that one. And now we're over to the E file. This pawn here, that's quite well defended. It's defended by the pawn on the F3 square. It's also defended by the queen. Over to the F file, we have a pawn here. And is that pawn defended? No. The knight here, is that defended? No. The pawn here, is that defended? Yes, it's defended by the bishop and by the king. And I know this is maybe getting a little bit tedious and a bit slow, but it's also very important practice. And we're almost done. So stay with me. We're almost there. Okay, it's defended by the king and the bishop. This bishop's defended by the king and the rook. We hop over to the G file. We have a pawn, which is defended by the bishop and the knight. We have this pawn defended by its neighbor. And we're over to the G file where we have an undefended rook, a pawn which is defended by the rook. We have a queen which is defended by the knight, a pawn which is defended by the queen, the rook, the pawn, and the knight. and we have a rook which is undefended. Okay, so now the last one. This is the last one. We'll go through this one pretty quickly, okay? Here's an undefended rook. Here's an undefended rook. Okay, what else have we got? We have, let's see, just going through pretty quickly here. Very quickly, in fact. There's an undefended pawn. Here's an undefended rook. And here's an undefended rook up here as well. Okay, so the idea of all of these puzzles that I've been showing you, the idea is it's actually very important to get comfortable with these undefended pieces, because when you're playing games, a lot of the times, the difference between winning and losing is going to be decided by whether or not you can observe undefended pieces. Okay, undefended pieces. So let me now share a different screen, and we're going to see what this looks like, you know, when we actually have to move the pieces. We're not just going to identify undefended pieces, but what happens when we actually have to move them. So in this case, we're playing as black. We can give a check to the black king. Because our bishop here controls all of this diagonal, it means that the king cannot run away here or here. And if we bring our queen here, it means that his king actually won't be able to move anywhere here either. So his king actually won't be able to move at all. So does that make it checkmate? Well, no, it doesn't. And the only reason is because this bishop here, after we bring our queen here, this bishop can move here to block the check. It can block the check. So what does this have to do with undefended pieces? Well, let's find out. Is this piece undefended? No, it's defended. This is undefended. And well, actually, no, this is defended by the queen. Excuse me. Our queen here is undefended. Let's go through quickly like we did in the last one and find any undefended pieces. The queen here is undefended. Okay, we have an open file here on the D file. Okay, this pawn is undefended. The bishop is undefended. And that's it. Everything else is defended. So step one is figuring out which pieces are loose. Okay. Step two is actually, how can we take advantage of that? You know, it's our turn. So if we wanted to be very safe, we could maybe take one of our pieces and just defend it. You know, we could put the queen here where it's defended by a pawn. You know, or we could put the bishop here where it's defended by a pawn. These, you know, that's something you could do. But keep in mind, his queen and his pawn are also undefended. So why is that important when we're thinking of what we want to do? Well, what we were wanting to do is we were wanting to give him a check here because it's almost checkmate. The only thing he can do to defend is to block with his bishop. But remember something. His queen is not defended. So once we give the check and he blocks with the bishop, we will actually be able to take that queen. Okay, so now you can start to see the way that you can find moves, very important moves, these tactical strikes, which are all based upon undefended pieces. So let's give the check. Okay, and you see he had to block. There was no other option for him. And now that he's blocked, there's actually an undefended queen there. And we're going to take that with check. Okay, very good. Here's another puzzle. So hopefully you'll help me work this one out. Okay, let's see what's going on in this puzzle in terms of undefended pieces. Okay, firstly, our queen is undefended. Our knight is also undefended. From his perspective, he also has a queen which is undefended. He has a knight which is undefended. And he has a bishop which is undefended. Okay, so those are the undefended pieces. Everything else is currently defended. That's step one. Step two, how do we take advantage of these things? Well, one thing we could do is consider capturing an undefended piece. So what happens if we capture this knight, which is undefended? Well, remember that we also have this piece here, which is undefended. So one thing he could do is just capture back our knight. Okay. And that's possible. But it's not the only thing that he might think of doing, because there's other undefended pieces. Remember, there's our queen here. So if we took, he could decide to attack our queen, possibly by using his bishop to strike our queen, as well as x-ray our rook behind. Okay, that's possible. However, if he does that, then we would be able to take the bishop with our knight. So we're okay with that. So if we take this and he takes this, I guess we need to find a good way to follow up. Okay, and it's not easy, but I'm looking at this other undefended piece over here. Remember, we've identified that this is also loose. Okay, and if his queen ends up over here after we take his knight, maybe we could then push this pawn forward where it attacks the bishop and the queen at the same time. I know this is quite complicated, okay, but that's chess for you. And I think you really have a good eye for chess. You have a good mind for chess. And I think you can sort of follow what I'm getting at here. So if we take the knight, he takes our knight, then we attack the queen and the bishop. Okay. Then he could take the pawn with his bishop, and when we recapture, he could take the pawn with his queen, giving us a check. And we would have to then move. Our knight here would be a good move to block. Okay, that's possible. But there's another idea. What if we take this bishop first, which is going to be check? That means he's going to have to take with his queen. Okay. Then we can bring this rook over to here, where it pins. Do you remember that word, pin? We can pin the knight to the queen. Okay, so the knight won't be able to move, because if it moves, he's going to lose the queen. One problem with that is that he can move his knight to take our queen. Then we can take his queen. That's true, but it's a queen for a queen. It's not necessarily a winning trade for us. So what else to do? Do we want to play this and then hit his bishop? One thing he could do is take his queen and capture immediately our knight. If he does that, again, we can play this rook move to attack the queen. And if the queen moves out the way, then we'll be able to take the bishop. So this one I think is fairly complicated. Let's take, no, it's actually wrong. Okay, this was a checkmate pattern. This was my bad. This was definitely my bad. But the concept stays the same, even though it's very complicated. As you can see, even I got it wrong, was this piece, like we identified, is one of the undefended pieces. And I was looking at a way to make sure that our queen is okay. We can take this piece. Turns out there's a much better move, and it still involves the safety of this undefended piece. Just so happens that we could have given a checkmate. So let's do a couple of more of these puzzles, and then I'm going to play a game. Okay, in this circumstance, it looks like we can give a check. And why that's important is because now we have 1 and 2 attackers against the bishop. The bishop is only defended once. Okay, and this brings in a new concept. Okay, previously, we were looking at puzzles and identifying undefended pieces like this queen. This queen is undefended right now, isn't it? And this pawn is undefended right now. Okay. These are what you would call type 1 undefended pieces. These are pieces which are simply not defended by anything at all. Okay, and those are very important to be aware of. But there is another kind of undefended piece. There's a kind of undefended piece which actually is defended. For example, this bishop. This bishop, it is defended by the king. The problem is it's not defended enough. It's only defended once by the king. We're attacking it twice. So this is defended, but it's not defended enough. So it's kind of still undefended. It's not the same as a type 1 undefended piece, which is just literally not defended by anything. But we can still take it because it's a type 2 undefended piece. It's not defended enough. Okay, so we can take that. And we're going to see that again and again, I'm sure. Okay, so what are we going to do? What are we going to do here? Okay, again, this is going to be pretty tricky. Almost certainly we can take the queen, which is undefended. Then he can take our queen, but our queen actually is defended. Okay, so again, this is what it comes down to is, here's an undefended queen. Why don't we just take that queen? He takes our queen, but now we've both taken a queen. The problem is for him, we also get to take a bishop. All right, so here's another example. Here's another example. Okay, but this one, we can give a check. And some of these examples are about undefended pieces. Some of them are about checkmate, which really comes down to an undefended king. Okay, so because our rook is here, there's like a magnetic wall, and the king can actually never get through this magnetic wall of our rook. Okay, there's also a magnetic wall over here because of our bishop. Okay, and because our bishop is here protecting this square, it means that this rook can come over and sit on that square. And if we have a rook on this square, there's magnetic wall here, magnetic wall here, magnetic wall here, magnetic wall here. And what it means is this king is completely trapped. There's no way to block the check. There's no way to take the piece up here. So this is going to be checkmate. Okay. Now this is a very interesting puzzle as well. We've looked at back rank checkmates before, so we're going to look at it again. This is actually a queen sacrifice. We can give the queen away with check. That forces his rook to capture. Then our rook can capture, and that will be checkmate. Okay, so let's do a few more of these, then we'll move into a game, because I want to show you how this all happens in real games. Okay, so once again here, we should look at some undefended pieces. This rook's undefended, this rook is undefended. Our bishop is undefended, our rook is undefended, we have an undefended pawn. These are all important observations. It's also very important to observe that we've got our little magnetic force field here with our bishop. And we also have an open file with no pawns, okay, an open file on the G file. It's correct, there's also an open file here on the B file and on the E file. So why am I most interested in the open file on the G file? Well, that's because that's where his king is. And at the end of the day, when it comes to chess, the most important thing for us to do is to checkmate the king. So that's why I'm most interested in the G file. So what happens if we put our rook on the open G file? Well, then it's going to be check. The king can't move away this way. It would have to move this way. Okay. Now, what happens then? Then we can put our bishop here to give another check. And the king has to actually move back over to here. And what we can do then is very, very, amazing. Okay, I'm going to make those moves first so we can see what happens. So we give the check. We give one more check. Okay, let me go back because it didn't show what I wanted it to show. Why was that so good? Why was this so good? Well, this king has to move again, doesn't it? Now, once it moves, and it's actually sitting over here now, we can take advantage of the fact that this rook is not defended. Okay, we can move our bishop here to attack the rook. And when we move our bishop over to here, it means that our rook is going to be giving another check to the king. That's very important. It's a discovered check. That's what it's called. A discovered check is when you move a piece away and then a piece behind it gives a check. Okay, so this king moves here. This one moves away, giving a check. Then the king has to move again. And then we can take the undefended rook and we'll end up winning the game. Okay, so let's do one more of these, and then it will be time to play a game. Okay, so there's a bunch of undefended pieces in the position. Okay, we could take the knight with our queen. It's important to know that our queen itself is undefended. So if we did something else, if we did something like this, he can take our queen. We don't want to allow that to happen. One thing we could do is take his queen. If we do that, he can then take our undefended queen. That gives us an opportunity to also take his undefended rook. And that could be good. I'm just wondering if it's better to just simply take the undefended knight. Okay. So what happens if we take the undefended knight? I would say he would have to move. He would have to move his undefended queen away. And that would be pretty good for us, I imagine. It's also possible for us to take his queen. If we take his queen, he's going to want to recapture our queen. Then we can take his rook, and we've won a rook. And we're also attacking this undefended rook, and we're also attacking, also we'd be attacking this undefended rook and this undefended bishop. And I think that's best. Okay, so we took a queen, he took a queen. That's an even trade. But now we get to start winning because we get to win a rook. And we're going to attack this rook and this bishop at the same time, all undefended pieces. So you see why that's very, very important. All right, so to finish off for today, I'm sorry if it's been not quite as good, considering that I'm not there with you and I can't hear you and can't take questions from you. But what I'm going to do is play a game, and I'm going to talk about what I'm thinking while I play the game. And we're going to see that undefended pieces are going to become very important, just in the same way that they were in some of those puzzles. Okay. But now you're going to see it in the context of a whole entire game. And hopefully that's going to be quite helpful to see. All right. So let me share my screen and let's get into it. So share screen. Here's the game. So I'm going to play as black. Okay. So we're going to wait for white to make their first move. And this is ultimately what chess is all about. It is very important to do your training, to practice looking at undefended pieces, to practice doing those puzzles. That's all important. Of course, it is also very important just to enjoy the game and to remember that at the end of the day, we are playing a game here, and it is supposed to be enjoyable. So while there is training involved, and sometimes the training can be even a little bit difficult, hopefully it's also, we're going to enjoy playing the game. Okay, so as you know, I like to get my pawns into the center of the board, and I like to develop my pieces. So this pawn was undefended. Now I've developed a knight here. The knight defends my pawn, and that's very important. Okay, very important indeed. Okay, now this pawn is kind of an type 2 undefended piece because he's attacking it twice, but I'm only defending it once with my knight. So it's kind of a type 2 undefended piece. So I could think of maybe ways that I can protect the pawn for a second time. Like maybe I could play a move like this and defend it with my pawn. I don't like to do that because I would rather put this pawn up here if I have a chance. Also, if I put the pawn here, then it blocks in my bishop. My bishop gets blocked. And I would rather, if my bishop could come out somewhere to a more active square outside of the pawn chain. I don't want it to get blocked inside a pawn chain. Okay. So I don't want to do it that way. I could maybe bring my queen here to defend the pawn, but I don't want to bring the queen out too early. And I don't want my queen to sit on the square that my knight would like to go to. Okay, I could bring my bishop here to defend, but I also don't really like that because then this pawn is blocked. And if this pawn is blocked, then it means that this bishop is blocked. And I don't want my pieces to be blocked. So here's another concept. Instead of trying to defend the pawn, I'm actually going to give it away through a trade. And I'm not giving it for nothing. I've taken his pawn and I'm going to let him take my pawn back. Okay. So I understood firstly, and the most important thing was that this pawn is now undefended. It's a type 2 undefended piece because it's attacked twice and only defended once. And I found a way to deal with that. I traded it. Okay, if I want to, I could trade again and bring his queen out early, but I'm going to do something different. I'm going to continue my development. So maybe I could play a move like this and get my pawn up into the center, which is something that I was wanting to do anyway. Okay. And the pawn here would in fact be defended by my queen. That's important to know. So that could be a nice move to play. Okay. What else I could do? I could attack that pawn with my knight because this pawn here is undefended. So maybe I should just attack the undefended pawn. And that's possible as well. Okay, but I'm going to play this. Normally I actually would just develop the knight. But just today, I'm going to do it this way instead. A good move for him, I think, would be to develop his bishop here and pin my knight so that the knight can't move. If he does that, he'll have 2 attackers against the knight, and the knight is only defended once. So again, if he puts his bishop here, then this knight will become a type 2 undefended piece. And I would have to be very careful about that. What I might do is then defend it again with my bishop. Okay. Okay, he didn't play that move. He probably should have played that move. And I'm happy to see that he didn't. But what he did do, he developed his knight. And he's playing very well. Now this pawn is again an undefended piece. It's type 2 undefended because he has 2 attackers. I only have 1 defender. Okay. So again, I could take the pawn here, and that could be nice. That could be a good idea. He can recapture, but then that would actually be a problem for him. So I'm going to take the pawn. Why is that a problem if he recaptures? A problem for him. The reason is, okay, he didn't recapture, and it's lucky because in this case, this knight is actually a type 2 undefended piece. It's only defended by the queen. Okay, whereas we were attacking it with our knight and our queen. So if he took this pawn, we would have been able to take the knight, which would be really good for us. So again, you can see straight away the importance of these undefended pieces, type 1 undefended and type 2 undefended pieces. But what he didn't do, he did not recapture our pawn, which actually gives us the opportunity to defend the pawn. Now, I don't want to necessarily hold on to this pawn at all costs. What I want to do is continue to develop my pieces. It just happens to be nice for me that I can develop a piece and defend the pawn at the same time. Okay, so that's what I'm going to do. I'm just developing a piece because that's most important, to keep developing. It just so happens that I'm also protecting this pawn, which is nice. Now, you may remember, Jayden, there was a game that you played, I think about 2 weeks ago, and we analyzed that game together. And in that game, I said, don't move these 3 pawns around the king where you should be trying to castle your king, right? Don't move these 3 pawns unless you need to, unless you really need to. Now, the reason for that is because when you move these pawns around your king, you actually create weaknesses around your king, which is really important. So what weaknesses has he created by doing this? Well, the main weakness is this diagonal has become open. This diagonal toward his king is open. Okay. He used to have a pawn here which closed the diagonal. And the pawn here also covered this square. Now he's really weakened this. He's really weakened this quite a lot. Okay. And that's going to become important. Now, I want to continue developing. Okay. And I want to have a think now about the best way to proceed. We can't rush in chess. Sometimes you need to think. So what I want you to do now is the same thing that I'm going to do. Let's stop here and let's have a think about this position, okay? So take your time and try and think about what sort of moves you might play if you were playing in this position. And I'm going to do the same. Let's have a think and we'll come back and speak about it, okay? Okay. Now, I'm not sure what moves you've considered. There's probably a lot of good moves to consider here. You could consider developing your bishop so that you're ready to castle. Developing your bishop here is nice because it pins the knight. It pins the knight. See, at the moment, this pawn is a type 2 undefended piece because he's attacking it once, twice. We're only defending it once. Okay. So, you know, we could trade it off and get rid of the problem that way. That's possible, absolutely possible. We could, however, we can't really just put a bishop here to defend because his knight would capture our bishop. So we could capture the knight and, you know, after he recaptures, we could then put a bishop here. And that's also a very possible move. It's also possible to bring a bishop here because if the bishop's here pinning the knight, then it means that this knight cannot participate in the attack on the pawn, which means that actually he again only has one defender. We have one attacker and we have one defender. So by doing this move, we develop and we also defend our type 2 undefended piece. So this is a nice move. I think this is a perfectly nice move as well. And I'm not sure what to play. I think in the spirit of just trying to develop, I will play this move because I want you to understand how important it is to prioritize your development, get your king safe, and get all of your pieces into the game. Okay, but I do think this move was also going to be good. Okay, unfortunately, it looks like the opponent has left the game. We'll give him a small chance to come back, just in case he does come back. Okay, but I can show you what I think would have happened. If we took the knight, why I think that would have been nice is he has to recapture the knight, either with his bishop or his queen. Okay, if he takes with the bishop, we can then take this pawn. And he's unable to capture with his queen because then we would take his bishop. So that means he would have to take with the pawn. And if this pawn has to take back here, then he has one isolated pawn here and one isolated pawn there. All right, let's claim the victory. I'll go to the analysis board so I can show you that idea. So I think this was nice. We were in a good position. If we had taken, if he takes with the bishop, we can take the pawn. And my point was he can't take with the queen because then we would take the undefended bishop. And now we're just winning. And if instead he takes with the pawn, he now has a completely ruined pawn structure. And that's a long-term weakness for him, which is always going to plague him for the rest of the match. Okay. The reason that we couldn't just do that straight away is because he could take with his knight. Okay. And that's also okay. It's okay, but it's better to take the knight and only then take the pawn, because that forces him into a bad situation like this. Or he might have taken with his queen. Then we can take the queen. He takes back. Then we take this. It's true he can also take our knight here. We can take this pawn, threatening to get a queen. So he would have to take that. Then we take the bishop. His pawns have been eradicated here. We have double isolated pawns, but at least it's better than his situation. In any case, I'm going to play one more because he left. I didn't get to show you, what really happens, later in a game. Now, that was a lot of undefended pieces there that we did see. We did get to see a lot of undefended pieces. And most of them were actually type 2 undefended pieces where they were defended, but they just weren't defended enough. And that's very important. But I also want to be able to show you what happens as the game progresses. So let's play one more. Again, I like to put my pawns out into the center. I like to develop my pieces, and I want to get my king nice and safe. Okay, so I'm going to put my bishop here, because even though we're attacking this pawn, he's defending it. I'm trying to develop. I want to get my king safe. Okay, he's attacking this pawn right now. So it's almost certainly a good idea to just defend that pawn, right? It might actually be possible to castle, let him take the pawn, then put a rook here to attack his knight. But I'm going to play it very simple. I'm going to defend this pawn. Now, the reason I'm okay to do this is because I've already got the bishop outside of the pawn chain, okay? If this bishop was still back here, then it would be blocked in. It'd be blocked in by the pawn chain. But I've got the bishop already outside of the pawn chain, so I don't mind doing this move at all. In contrast, look at this move that he's made, a very interesting move, and not necessarily a good move. By putting his bishop here, he has given extra protection to this pawn. It's now defended twice. But he's blocked this pawn. Remember, we spoke about this in the last game. Because this pawn is blocked, it means this bishop is blocked. Okay? So what he might want to do is get this bishop out by moving this pawn instead, and then putting his bishop out this way. Okay, but that's typically not a very good idea. You want to be able to move this pawn. So this is not very good, really. But how do we actually proceed? How do we proceed here? Okay. Let's see. Well, we can continue our development. That's definitely a possibility. We can just castle, and that might be a nice possibility as well. That's what I'm going to do in this particular example. I'm just going to castle, and let's see what he does. He castles as well. So we can now develop if we want. What's our plan of action going to be in this game? Of course, we want to continue developing. So I'm going to do that. I'm just going to play a very simple game, just developing my pieces. There are some more advanced concepts that I can share with you, actually quite a lot of them. But what I'm really trying to get you in the good habit of developing your pieces and being aware of any undefended pieces. So there's an undefended rook here, just like our rook is undefended. But at this early stage in the game, there's no way for us to take this piece. We can't put our bishop here and just take the rook, because he can take the bishop. And there's also a knight and a pawn in the way. So we're aware of the undefended pieces, but we also have to learn to become aware of which pieces we can actually take advantage of. And at the moment, it seems like there's not really any pieces we can take advantage of. Now, why has he played this move? He probably wants to play this move. Now, he can't just play this move straight away, because it would be undefended, and we could take it with our knight or with our bishop. Okay? When he's played this move, he defends the square. So now he actually can push the next pawn. Okay? And that would be an attack on our bishop. And when our bishop moves, he could then potentially attack our knight as well. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to actually defend this square. I'm going to defend this square. And why I like this move as well, this is one of those higher level concepts. Another reason I like this move, so now if he plays this, we can take. That was my idea, okay? But there's another reason I like this move, and that is this bishop is really nice, the way that it x-rays his king, okay? And he's showing us exactly why I played this move. Because this bishop is really nice, attacking his king, I want to be able to protect this bishop. And in this position, if he attacks my bishop, okay, I have nowhere to put the bishop to save it. I can't put it here or here, and I can't take the pawn. And if I come back, he can still take the bishop. Whereas after I play this move, now he's played this move. But now I can actually bring the bishop all the way back here where it's safe. It's safe here, and it's still from a long range, x-rays his king. Okay, and his knight now looks kind of silly on the edge of the board. It's not doing anything very useful. Okay, it was also an undefended piece. Now it's defended by his queen. However, this bishop was only defended by the pawn. Now this bishop is a type 1 undefended piece. Okay, so can we take advantage of that? Can we take advantage of the fact that this is a type 1 undefended piece? Maybe. Maybe. This is pretty tricky. What if we came here to attack the undefended piece? Well, then he would take our knight. We can take back. No, that's not going to work for us, okay? He gets a knight, and it's just not enough reason for us to do that. So what do we want to do here? What I want to do is continue our development. Okay, we had to take a quick break from development in order to cover his threats. You know, he had this threat. So I covered that threat. Here he had the threat of taking our bishop. I wanted to keep the bishop. But here, there's no real threat involved. No threat. So what I actually want to do here is continue developing. And how I'm going to do that is I'm considering playing this move to pin the knight to the queen. And I would expect then he might move his bishop back. Okay, he may move the bishop back to unpin the knight. And I don't really want to allow him to do that. But if he does do that, okay, if he does do that, then he would be leaving this pawn undefended. So here's another very important concept that's related to undefended pieces. Okay, we've started with just loose pieces on the loose-piece-o-tron, type 1 undefended pieces that are just not defended by anything. Okay, we progressed and we learned about type 2 undefended pieces, which are pieces that are defended, but they're not defended enough. There's another concept, and that concept is the concept of something called the overloaded defender. The overloaded defender. So this bishop here would be an example. This bishop is currently trying to do two things at once. It's trying to defend this pawn, and it's trying to defend this pawn, both at the same time. Okay, so if this bishop moves either in this direction or this direction, it's going to have to give up on one of these pawns. So again, I quite like this idea, because if he comes back, he gives up this pawn here. Okay, that's a possibility. That's a possibility. There's also the queen here, which is sort of an overworked piece, except that this knight is also defended by a pawn. Okay, so how do we do this? We could also just put the bishop here and put pressure on the pawn, which is currently maybe weak, depending on what his bishop does. Okay, so there's various ways to go about this. I'm going to do it. It's difficult to know which way is best. What's the best way to go? Let's have a think. And you can think about this too, because we have time. I'm going to do it this way. because it just develops a piece to a very active square. Okay, it pins his knight. There's so many concepts to show you about Jayden. One of them is also the concept of an outpost square, which we might be able to use. And I will show you more about that in the future. But today, again, I'm wanting to focus on these undefended pieces. So his bishop here, he has left it where it is. So for the moment, it does defend everything. Meanwhile, he is now attacking our bishop. But there's a reason why I'm okay with that. I'm going to take the knight. If he takes with his pawn, he ruins his kingside pawn structure. And in fact, he's already made a bit of a weakness here. And if he takes with his queen, well, now I'm going to play this move. And this is the move that takes advantage of something called an outpost square. This knight is on an outpost. Firstly, we're attacking the queen, but that's not what makes it an outpost square. What makes it an outpost square is the fact that it's in his half of the board, okay? We're in his half of the board. We are supported by a pawn, and he has absolutely no pawns which can ever get rid of my knight, okay? Because his pawns have already gone past my knight. They can't go back to attack my knight, which means my knight is now going to sit here freely for the rest of the game or for a long, long time. And even if he ever gets rid of my knight, I can put my bishop there, and then my bishop will sit on the outpost square. So this is very important. Okay, very important indeed. He still has troubles with his bishop. Okay, so what is going on here? How do we make sense of all of these things that have happened in this game? Because a lot of things have happened. Okay, from the very start, we just tried to develop. Okay, we paid attention to our undefended piece and we defended it. Okay, we castled, which is all part of development. We developed a knight, so all just normal developing. Here, we didn't want to allow him to attack our bishop and get a queen side attack happening on the queen side of the board. We didn't want to allow that on the queen side. So we took one quick break from our development to grab a bit of space on the queen side, particularly to control the b5 square. Then we saved our bishop because we really like what our bishop does. Now we continued our development. Okay, we made some weaknesses in his position and we put our knight on an outpost square. And look what he's done. He's moved his rook. He did not pay attention to the queen. Okay, his queen is, it's defended by the pawn, but it's worth a lot. It's worth even more than our knight. Our knight is very nice on the outpost square, but it's best to take the queen, which also ruins his pawn structure. And he resigned. So unfortunately, again, we didn't get to go through a full game and see the full ramifications. Okay. But even in this position where the game ended before I took the knight, before I took the queen, you know, the problem for him is his development. Okay, let me take this to an analysis board. The problem for him, even if he brings his queen back to safety, okay, let's just have a look at the way that this has happened, okay? He, first of all, he only has 2 pieces out on the board, 2 pieces. In contrast, we have 1, 2, 3 pieces out on the board. There's also the problem of not just the quantity of pieces, not just the number of pieces, but also the quality of the pieces or how good they are and what they're doing. Okay, he has a knight, but that knight, it can't come here. It can't come here. It can only go backwards. It's not doing anything on the side of the board. And his bishop is also not doing anything. It's just staring at his own pawns. And in fact, it's overloaded trying to defend 2 pawns. So maybe in the future, we can actually attack this bishop somehow. And if it moves away, we'll be able to take one of these pawns like we were talking about. So his 2 pieces here, they're not good. Whereas in contrast, we have a beautiful bishop, which x-rays his king on a long diagonal. We have a beautiful knight, which is sitting on an outpost square and cannot be chased away by any of the pawns on the position. And we have another beautiful knight here that's putting pressure on this potentially weak pawn in the case that the bishop ever moves away. In addition to that, his bishop still can't move. Okay, still can't move. And his rooks are a long way away from being connected to each other. Our bishop can move freely, at least in the future. And all we have to do is move our queen once, and our rooks are defended. So we have a beautiful, harmonious position. And most of it actually came about by just trying to develop, but developing in a way where we were being very careful of undefended pieces and pieces that were not defended enough. So let's look one more time. We attacked his undefended pawn. He defended it. Very good. We developed a bishop. This is the Italian game. Do you remember that? The bishop comes here after these first few moves. This is the Italian game. He developed his knight, attacking an undefended pawn. So we didn't just want to castle straight away. We decided to develop the pawn. Now, it also was possible here, if we wanted to, we could have developed with the knight to protect the pawn. But I think this is a little bit better, a little bit more solid. Okay, now here he could immediately attack our bishop, and we would just have to really, there's two options. We could bring the bishop here and let him take it. And now we open up a file. It's not an open file because there's still a black pawn. Even though there's no white pawn here anymore, there is still a black pawn. So it's not a fully open file, but it's a semi-open file. Okay, so that's one option. Or alternatively, we maybe could have played a move like this if we wanted to keep our bishop. And then if he tries to attack us, we can come here. Then he attacks us again, and he ends up winning the bishop anyway. So that's why in this scenario, I would just bring the bishop back and get a semi-open file for the rook. Okay, but that's not what we were focusing on today. What we're focusing on is the fact that we just defended this undefended piece. Then we castled. And straight away, his development started going bad, but at least he was defending everything still. That's true. He's still defending. He castles. We develop. Okay, he threatens to play this move, so we defend that square. He attacks the bishop. So I didn't just blindly develop and let him capture the bishop. Because if he captures that bishop, well, now our pawns are a little bit strange, a little bit weak. And I don't like that. I don't want the pawns to be weak. Wouldn't have been too bad, but I wanted to keep this bishop safe. Now, after he's played this move, he hasn't developed anything. What he should have done here probably is either move the bishop back away so that he can, in future, move this pawn and get the bishop out that way. Or what he otherwise should have done, instead of this move, he could have done this. Okay, that defends his undefended knight. And it also, after we do something like this, or even like this, doesn't matter, he could then get the bishop out this way. And you see that now his pieces are playing a little bit better. Okay, a little bit more harmonious. Now if we take here, he just takes back, his rooks are connected, everything looks pretty good. Okay, but the problem was he didn't focus on his development. Okay, and that let us focus on our development quite freely. Okay, we take the knight. Again, if he takes with the pawn, look how weak his king looks all of a sudden, because he's destroyed these pawn structures around his king compared to our pawn structure, which is very, very solid. So this would have been absolutely fine for us. And even in this scenario, I still would have just put my knight here, where it pressures this pawn and where it pressurizes his entire position, actually. It does a very good job. Or like in the game where he takes with the queen, I still put the knight here on a beautiful square supported by our pawn. He can't attack us. and we attack the queen. He should have come back, brought his queen back to safety. Then we could have just continued with our development. Okay, for example, or maybe a move like this. Well, yeah, there's lots of examples, but that would be one way we could continue. Then he would probably want to try and do what I was saying before, right? But here we're definitely looking strong. We're definitely looking strong here. But he didn't pay attention to the fact that his queen was effectively undefended. Okay, this is kind of like a type 3 undefended piece, where it's not undefended and it's not under-defended either. It's attacked once and it's defended once, so it's fine, right? But the reason it's a type 3 undefended piece is because it's a high valued piece, but it's attacked by a lower valued piece. Remember, the knight's only worth 3, the queen is worth 9. So this is not an equal trade at all. So even though it's defended by 1 pawn and attacked by 1 piece, it's still a type 3 undefended piece because we can take it. And that's good for us. Okay, really good for us. Anyway, Jayden, we're out of time for the moment. I'm really sorry once again that I couldn't be there with you today. I hope this video helps you a little bit and gives you some ideas about the importance of undefended pieces and loose pieces. And hopefully you enjoy the games. And I know sometimes I might explain things a bit too detailed or something like that. And sometimes it can be hard to, want to practice with the loose-piece-o-tron or do the puzzles. So I would encourage you to try and enjoy your chess, play games, have fun with it. But while you're having fun, try and remember some of these things from this video today and from our lessons in general. You probably will end up having more fun because you'll win more often when you develop your piece as well. And when you look out for their undefended pieces that you can take. And when you look out for your own undefended pieces or under-defended pieces, okay, type 1 or type 2 or type 3, which need to be defended better. If you do those things, you'll win more often, you'll have even more fun. So I hope that helps. And again, sorry I couldn't be there with you today, but I'm looking forward to seeing you again next week. Have a great week, and we'll see you later. Bye.